Hello, Zay Automotive Reviews. And guys, today we're going to talk about the Ford Bronco, the body and frame, and the suspension setup. Before we get into that, let's go over here first. Now, to get the understanding of how the 2021 Ford Bronco will stack up against the undefeated Jeep Wrangler off-road, the Bronco chief engineer, a program engineer, and vehicle engineering manager had to explain this in detail. And they explained this to Jello Planet, which is basically a great magazine. And basically, what they came up with about the Ford Bronco and the Jeep Wrangler is about the body, the shell, and what it's made of. What's the design to do? Let's take a look at some of these pics. We're gonna come back and get in some detail about these pics. Now, definitely the body's got, sports tubes are boron steel, as you can see. The swing gate is aluminum. The doors and the hood and the fenders are aluminum, and the frame is a fully boxed high strength steel. Just to give you an idea of what the Ford Bronco is made of. And now we're going to get all into the suspension a little more in depth in a minute. So just hang in there. This is just a see-through clip of the engine and suspension and just how it's made. I really like this picture. I think it's, the powertrain, everything is just right here. This is just awesome, folks. This is just a photo of the of how it looks and what we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail. Now let's jump in. Now first thing we're gonna discuss is the suspension system, suspension and steering in the Ford Bronco. Now, the JL Wrangler has similar body compositions, with the door hinges and hood and windshield frame and fenders and rear swing gate all made of aluminum, while the rest of the body is steel. Now, the Jeep swing gate doors have a magnesium structure under the skin, while the Ford swing gate is entirely aluminum. We're going to get back into a little bit more in this. Now, the Bronco shares its basic platform with the Ford Ranger pickup. Now, that means the Bronco utilizes an independent front suspension consisting of two aluminum arms. Let's look at the suspension setup. We're going to find it in a second. So here is a coilover mount to the Ford aluminum lower control arm, as you can see here. And then we have the CV exo shaft too as well. Now, this means that the Bronco utilizes an independent front suspension consisting of two aluminum arms and coilovers, with Bilstein shocks on the most capable model, and the lower trims the Sasquatch options, getting the Hitachis that mount to the lower of those two arms. Here's a look at the setup from a few different angles, as you can see. Let's try to see the different angle of the different setup, which we'll see in this pic right here with the struts. There it is right here. This is a different angle of the same setup. Let's take a closer look at that. You can still see the control arms and everything else as well. It's quite a good setup right here. Let's look at another angle. I'm gonna flick through some of these pics right quick. take a look at this angle. Now you'll notice in the first of the three images immediately above, one point out, the CV velocity axle. And let's go back to where the CV velocity axle is actually seen. And this is simply a shaft whose job it is to transfer power from differentials to the front two wheels, which can obviously steer and also droop the bump when going over uneven roads. Now the joint inside the black rubber boot, the second boot, is hidden by the shock in that first image. It allows for the shaft to flex, yielding smoother power delivery when the wheels are turning and transversing undulations. Let's go back. Now, on the Ford Bronco, those CV axles span between the wheel hub, onto which the wheels and the tires are mounted. In a Dana Advantech independent front differential unit, here's what the differential units look like. Take a look. It's just a frame mounted cast iron aluminum on the lockerless models. Differential isolated with the rubber bushings between it and the frame. There's a tube coming off the passenger side of the housing. Let's take a look at that. Now, likely to allow the tube that's coming off the passenger side of the housing, likely to allow for the two axle shafts to be the same length, since the differential is offset to the driver's side, so that the front drive shaft spanning between the transfer case and the differential, which we'll go back to and actually look. I jumped from that one too soon. Then we'll discuss it a little bit more. Now there's a tube coming off the passenger side of the housing, likely to allow for the two axle shafts to be the same length, since the differential is offset to the driver's side, so that the front drive shaft spanning between, now that's between the transfer case and the differential, can clear the powertrain. Now, having equal length half shafts is likely a benefit from the parts commonality and the axle shaft packaging standpoint, though we suppose it could also help reduce the torque steer. So, besides that, that's a cool setup right here. It definitely looks clean. Definitely see that this is the driver's side. Let's go back and look at the front independent suspension split case design, which is right here. Now, Dana labels this particular front differential unit a split case design, as shown above. Here's a look from the passenger side. You'll notice the drain and the fill bolts marked in yellow. Let's go back and take a look at that. Now, as you see the drain and the fill bolts marked in yellow, after extreme off-roading in water or mud, the owners may want to remove these to replace any potential contaminated fluids. That is nice to know. So after going off-road, you can remove those as you can see, these that are in yellow, whoa, you'll have to remove those to drain the fluids. Now, Ford engineers told the journalists that the rear differentials, more are later, does not have a drain plug, meaning changing fluid will require pulling the entire cover, though that's coming on solid axles. Oh wow! So as you can see, who would figure? But this is just something that you need to know when you're going off-roading, that you do have to drain that to make sure that there's no fluids or anything in there. All the water and the mud that you'll be driving through. Now, the GL Wrangler front suspension, by contrast, used the 5-link solid axle design, pioneered by the 1984 Jeep Cherokee. I believe it was Model 9. Now, the suspension was then called the Quadrolink. Now, the setup utilizes 4 control arms running parallel. Let's see if we can find that. Here it is right here. Now, the GL Wrangler front suspension, by contrast, again, that's the 5 links. You look here, you see the track bar mounts to the axle here. You see the lower control arms here, which is also mount to the axle. You see the shock mounts to the rear side of the axles, you can see here. And then you see the coil springs, which perch on the axle here. And you see the sway bar right up here. And then you see the coil spring cup, which is also on the frame. And it says right here that the setup utilizes 4 control arms running parallel to the SUV, 4 and after the axis. Now, 2 upper and 2 lowers. Now, their jobs is to locate the axle longitudinally and to prevent axle rotation under load. Now, 5th link, called the track bar, which you see here, locates a solid axle laterally and spans from the frame across the car to the axle, across the truck to the axle. Pretty cool setup. Now, here's how the front axle looks from behind all 4 control arms, where areas only they're shown above. Let's take a look at that axle, how that looks. This is how it looks. And the image gives a little better look at the passenger side and the upper control arm. You can see how the upper control arms are mounted to the frame, here and here. And you see how the upper control arms is mounted to the axle, here and here. And the lower control arms. You see the lower control arms mounted to the frame, the shock, the coil spring, the lower control arms mounted to the axle. You can actually see all that. The upper control arms mounted to the axle, and the other UCA, which is hidden right here, and the lower control arm mounts to the axles right here. Now, the Bronco uses the coilovers that mounts toward the end of each control A-arm. Now, the Wrangler, meanwhile, has a separate coil in the damper shock, as seen above. As you see here, the coil mounts to the frame as a spring cup. As you can see, before we saw the spring cup. Let's go back and try to find that right quick. Yep, the spring cup right here, as you can see here. And the throttle axle has a spring perch located on top of the axle. Outboard just inside the axle C. Now the shock mounts to the frame on one side and the bracket on the rear side of the axle on the other. Now the Jeep live axle setup is simpler than the Ford. Since everything, now the diff and the axle shafts is contained inside a big tube held to the frame, with some basic steel arms. Now, the Ford setup, while fairly conventional among modern cars, is considered more technically advanced. And though the independent setup has some drawbacks from the off-road standpoint, it offers several dynamic advantages. And let's look at that. And one of the advantages with the independent front suspension, the Ford Bronco can adopt a steering setup that is not really possible on the Jeep Wrangler. And that's something to consider. So actually, the steering setup, which is on the Jeep Wrangler, is a solid front axle, rack and pinion, simple and clean steering design. Ubiquitous on all modern passenger cars. It offers a number of advantages over the steering box, which we talked about earlier in another video. Now, it gets more and more in detail, but as you can see from the different setups, the Jeep has its advantages, but also the Bronco has its advantages. The Bronco is actually more advanced. So you're not gonna be able to top it. And as you know, the Ford setup, fairly conventional, more technically advanced, and an independent setup, which means it actually excels over the Jeep. Again, if you're going to do straight up off-roading and not going to take it on the road, the Jeep is it. Not that it excels, but it is not, how you say it, it's not everyday usable. But the Bronco in itself is just more advanced. And the independent setup may have some drawbacks from an off-road standpoint, but it has those dynamic advantages that Ford knows it's going to win, because the SUV is going to be used more on the road, and it's also going to be used off-road, but not every day. And unlike the Jeep is made to be used off-road practically every day. It's made to stay. It's not made. They're making some changes, but the Ford Bronco leads. This is A Automotive Reviews, guys. Thanks for listening. Remember, like and subscribe. And this is just about we're just discussing the Jeep, and we're discussing the Bronco in light of the Jeep, and how one is superior to the other, and how the Bronco is just conventional, and it's just everyday usability. Not saying that it's going to hurt the market of the Jeep, because the Jeep appeals to a more hardcore enthusiast than the Bronco does. And the Bronco also appeals to hardcore enthusiasts, but just the Jeep, the off-road is its home, where the Bronco home is off-road and also on the regular highways and everyday driving too as well. Hey, Automotive Reviews. Thanks for watching. Remember, like, share, and subscribe.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more interesting videos.